The practice session.
We don't go through everything. I just want to see how it look like. I do. It's another solution. So we don't have to, because of time, we won't go through everything. I just want to, maybe you can just say like the what you'll do first, then what you'll follow next, instead of saying that the whole thing like we did previously.
Okay.
Well, some two I'll introduce Nani, then I'll speak about this, then Maurice will speak. Maybe other Maurice it's the bulk of the presentation. I just want to see how it will pan since we have this.
So should I just mention like I'll be doing, okay, obviously I'll start with it. I don't know, welcoming.
Yeah, so I want to see how it will look like from my mini.
Okay, so I should actually like do it.
I want to see how it will look like from my side.
Yeah. The queue.
What do you mean by your people? What do you mean by your people? An accident. I think because of all the things going on, most likely it's an accident. Alana amesema nini? Hey, Fred.
Welcome this afternoon. Welcome to our session this afternoon. Thank you for being part of it. We shall cover data protection. In particular, we'll go through what are data audits and impact assessments, what do they entail, how are they undertaken, and why are they important to us in our daily practice.
Yes. Sorry? Okay.
So,
oh, you told me to look at the camera?
Yeah.
Okay, should have gone with this. Okay. Is that posture Nini?
It is very okay.
Okay. So should I start?
Everyone is listening. Brightness.
Okay. Should I start? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Omoi Mavanga. I'm your host today. And on behalf of CM Academy, welcome to our webinar today. Welcome to our webinar today. We are happy to... On what else? Okay, I better not breathe though.
Thank you so much, Omoi, for the introduction. Thank you so much, Dave, for the introduction, Moyo. Once again, welcome everyone to our session this evening. It's on data protection compliance. In particular, we'll cover data audits and impact assessments. With this, we'll discover... Sorry?
No, kuna confirm kama sauti iko sawa, umesema iko sawa.
Okay.
Asongeshe kwa moyo ati laptop yako upeleke first.
Okay, like that?
Ama nifinye hivi, si ndio? Hapo sawa, hapo iko sawa. Haya.
Okay.
We are making you look good. Okay. So tuko sawa inside.
No.
Or is it?
So do something for behind the scenes.
Okay. So means like
Let us see. Where? Oh. They should receive the link. So I got you. I see if you're going to put quite email because me I got mine on the quite email. Yeah, personally when I register, see when you register for it, you can assume that you will they'll approve it. Yeah, personally, I got it going, but let me tell Alan, just in case it's an
It's a
issue.
good pause.
We're feeling no, this.
Oh, yeah. Probably, so I just need to prove.
Okay, so let me tell Alan. Okay. Okay, let me just speak that. So,
Do you want to smile?
I smile to you.
okay.
Let me see. Where this content is.
No, sorry, that's what I'm doing.
I hope they can see my shirt.
Okay.
Oh, he brought us. It's really nice.
This camera is not everything.
Kutoka hapa kwa kulikuwa kutoka juu.
You see the worst. Worst ever. She's the most nerve-wracking one. Doesn't take some comments to parliament or something.
Okay, that's not very good. I can imagine.
The most nerve-wracking thing I've done.
Really? So, but it's good. Give me these words of affirmation.
You're good to go. The bulk of the work. I think after the first 2-3 slides, fluent.
Yeah, but I feel like the bulk of the work actually in Verena, because actually I already have my BB in mind. Yeah, maybe I'm just here.
You don't need introduction to.
Yeah.
Unless you do something like you are trying to stand on the table and fall down.
Yeah, that could happen.
Yeah.
I think we should remove this. For aesthetic purposes.
Nani amekuja kwanza niletie. Ienda polepole.
Trying to
We just stop share.
well, it's 2 minutes too. But anybody go practice.
One last time. The mirror.
Umetuma wapi? I'm not seeing the one Alan has sent. I'm not seeing the one Alan has sent.
Do you know? Do you know something funny? That I plan to try to call me. Saitu. And I've signed up for this. So you know I'm about to go this and you call me.
Any plans for you?
Only the last two.
Ni count down tuanze. Nzuri. Utaniambia ni count down tuanze. Ngoja. Teori. Ambia wasi.
Transition from for you, you're being seen, everything you're doing is now. So, ambia watu we are starting in like 3 minutes. So, yeah, whenever you're ready, compose yourself. Start. Basically, because like.
For those who have joined us and those who are continuing to join us, we will start in 3 minutes.
Then you start up.
Mazenge. And on behalf of CM Academy, welcome to our webinar. We are happy to have you here. Today we'll be discussing a topic on data protection compliance, and in particular, data audits and DPIA, which is a shorthand for data protection impact assessment. So a few housekeeping items just before we start off. There is a chat box. We will begin with a 40-minute presentation, and we hope our presenters will keep time. Thereafter, we shall proceed for a Q&A session. There is a little chat box just down below where you can drop your questions. We will deal with them during the Q&A session. We shall be recording this webinar purely for education purposes, and we shall share the same with you after the presentation. Now, our speakers for today are experts in the areas of cybersecurity, both of them in different capacities. We have Mr. Michael Omuga, who is a cybersecurity and digital forensic expert working with Risk House International. He's also a trainer in the areas of system security audits, DPIA, penetration tests, as well as vulnerability tests. We have Mr. Maurice Mbugwa, who is a senior associate at the firm of CM Advocates. He is an expert in commercial law, and in particular, technology, media, and telecommunication law. Well, he says that TMT is the future of legal practice. Maybe he'll tell us more about that during his presentation. Welcome, Bona Maurice.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And once again, welcome everyone to this session. Thank you for making the time. We're grateful to have you on board. Today, we'll be talking about data protection compliance, and particularly, we'll be going through two main aspects of the compliance, with data auditing and the impact assessment. So essentially, we're going to discuss both of them, and we'll discuss ranging from what they are, why do we do them, and how do we do them. And we'll go through an introduction, then walking through the process of action they're taking one, and also inline them with what we actually mean by compliance. What are we complying to? And that's something that we're going to discuss throughout this time. And then we'll finish on a more technical bit where we'll run through actually undertaking it through our systems and technology. So to start with, what is a data protection audit? If I can give you a very dictionary kind of definition, this refers to the assessment of the operations of an organization to determine whether the policies and procedures implemented to regulate the data privacy and the use of data are working as planned. So what does that mean? Essentially, it's an A to Z of all the operations to make sure they are compliant with all the data protection laws we have. That means looking at a step-by-step process from every single department or every single business aspect as you may be in your organization. This means how you recruit people, how you deal with finances. Do you have customers? Do you have third-party persons helping with services? And A to Z of all your operations, and making sure that data protection compliant. This involves very different aspects, very many different aspects, some of them including data mapping or data classification, or even data shedding if possible. But just anything that can help us identify what you have, if there are any risks, or if you're actually secure in terms of cybersecurity reasons and avoiding any form of breaches that we have. So data audits are actually quite common than we think, and especially now in this new era of data protection, that's actually become a very, very significant factor in our day-to-day lives. If you think about the amount of information that we share on a daily basis, be it from work, be it from social media and social platforms, or in any scope, there's so much data we share. And the privacy and protection is of utmost importance because of what you can do with it, right? So the next bit is the data impact assessment. And what does that mean? They're still in line, and they're almost, they're set to achieve the same thing, but there's a small difference in between the two. So an impact assessment is a process designed to identify risks that are arising out of activities related to a particular project, and to minimize this risk as far as early as possible. What does this mean? Basically, it's a process that helps you identify, one, and two, minimize any risks involving data protection that you may have. And particularly, this is now focused in a particular activity that you're doing. So for instance, if I can give an example, if you're introducing a new project in your designated field or anything, you may require an impact assessment. Why? Again, just in the line of identifying and minimizing the risks. So in particular, an impact assessment is undertaken where there's a high risk that you might have a data breach. High risk, some of them can be very obvious and justifiable, some may not be as much. Let me give a very practical example. If you're working for an organization in the HR fields, and there's so many platforms and software that we use to streamline all the information organization. If you are in the process of migrating from one platform to another, that means there's a lot of personal data that would be at stake. A lot of this may be from all employees, all previous employees, all future employees that you're looking or in the process of onboarding, and even sometimes with third-party suppliers, if anything. So that has posed a high risk in terms of to individuals and their personal data. And while you're considering upgrading your system or onboarding the new platform that will assist with this, then it's very important that you undertake a data impact assessment. This will help you identify the risks and minimize any of them that may come through, possibly through, again, looking where there are loopholes in the system, if it's cybersecurity aspects or anything, and just being able to sort them out in between. So some examples we've given them in terms of what we consider as high risk, maybe projects or activities that involve credit scoring or profiling of customers. This would imply that there's a high use of data that you're going to have to take on and process for these services. Also in like invoice processing activities that involve sensitive personal data. Just for information, sensitive personal data is data that goes in a nutshell, data that goes beyond our basic data names and IDs or anything. This could include biometrics, blood types, family information, very high sensitive information. And when we have processing activities involving them, then it poses a high risk, and it's very recommended. Actually, it's required to undertake an impact assessment and be able to see if there's any way you can mitigate any possible risk that may come about. We say possible risk because it's almost inevitable that every time you undertake an audit or an impact assessment, you'd find that there's one or two areas that you expose that you need to start thinking about how you're going to deal with it. Anything can come up, so it's just the whole idea of being prepared. So I know we've spoken about at least what a data protection audit is and what an impact assessment is, and they sound pretty much the same. Here's the one difference between them actually. An impact assessment is just identifying the risks and find measures for them in regard to a very particular project. That would mean if you're doing, as we mentioned, if you're upgrading HR system, it's in regard to that particular system, the migration process, and the new systems that you're onboarding. While if it's in a data audit, this is the A to Z of the company, from all departments, all employees, all systems that you've employed, either platforms, IT systems, software systems, or manual systems. It's an A to Z of the entire organization, finding where there are loopholes, where there are safeguards, what needs to be implemented differently, what needs to be changed, and all of that. Another thing is that an impact assessment is more than recommended, it's actually required under law in some instances, but we'll also cover that later as we have discussed. So why do a data protection audit or even an impact assessment? As we mentioned, the key thing to remember is one, identifying risks and minimizing them. That means coming up with any measures to mitigate them, if anything. So for instance, the first one would be early identification of potential data protection risks. This could be from anything. This could be from the basics, finding out that there's a way of obtaining information without obtaining the consent of the parties or anything. Then at this point, you need to think of how to be able to obtain it and safeguard it. It would be a way that you can find, because you're working with third-party suppliers, you find out that there's a risk that information might leak. Some of it might be sensitive depending on the service industry or customer industry that you're dealing with. Some of it might not be. But at the same time, the key is identify, this is a loophole, this is a shortcoming. This is where we can have cyber attacks and people stealing our information, and then being able to deal with it. Second one is the proper implementation of procedures and policies. This is now almost the second stage after you do an audit. After you find out this is a risk, so what happens? If there are policies and procedures in place that are supposed to help you avoid such risks, have they been followed? If they haven't, then what needs to be done to make sure you're compliant with them from a step-by-step basis? If it's in terms of policies, and assuming it's an organization, why have the privacy policy of the employees or the organization, has it been complied with fully? Does anything else need to be done? What needs to be done is something that's being done and not working and needs to be changed to be able to be compliant. All that just to think about how you're implementing these things. Do you need to onboard other tools to assist you in this thing? All of them. Third, it allows for data classification. Data classification is basically the process where you're able to analyze all the information you have and all the personal data you have and being able to categorize them, which one is sensitive, which one is not personal data. So, and that you'll be able to know which one needs what level of security. If a certain form of a certain nature of data that you have requires, very strict security rules or procedures in place, then you can start thinking of how to safeguard this. Or it could be as technical as what softwares you need or what tools you need, or it could be as basic as who needs to see this information, how do we keep them away from everyone else other than these specific people. So data classification helps you, at least gives you a view of what you have and how you can protect it, and what needs to be protected and what doesn't. Because as you know, it's personal data is what is protected under law and what is actually protected globally. Any other form of information, unless there's a confidentiality aspect to it, may not necessarily be protected. Another aspect to this is, or rather another reason why we do data audits and impact assessment, is to increase the awareness on data protection. This is just as it reads. This, as I mentioned earlier, is almost inevitable that every time you undertake an audit or an impact assessment, that you're going to find there's an issue with it. It might not be the biggest issue, but because of how our modern times move so fast, and technology has infiltrated every aspect of our lives, you'll keep finding that there's something that you need to work better on, if not a lot on. So it helps you think about it, put things at the front of your mind, that even the next time you are onboarding new systems or changing the way an organization works, even introducing a new business model, that it's on the top of your mind. Data protection. How can this be done in a safe way? What needs to be done? Our systems outdated. Do we need to either revamp them or change them completely? It keeps things on the top of your mind and things that really matter. Fourthly, there's one of the reasons that they boost the confidence in the system and organization as a whole. This is now as a result of everything. Once your systems are secure and everyone's information is safe, including your clients and your customers, it gives the organization some form of confidence in that people working with you or people from the outside are able to trust you with the information. As you've seen, or as you know, recently in the news all over, being in Europe or in the US or here in Africa and in Kenya, because there's been a lot of data breaches which can cost a company so much. In some instances, you find if it's, for instance, a pharmaceutical and it's leaked so much patient data and all that, can really have so many consequences, and others, including reputational loss, which you almost never recover, and as well as also financial loss. You can attract fines, and even the system that you'd have to put just to prove yourself again might cost so much. So it might almost be irreparable harm that you can do. So having safe systems, knowing that you're doing audits every now and then, increases confidence from the public to your organization or to your structure itself. And also, this is just related to the point you just said, it reduces costs and disruptions. So anytime there's a breach or there's a attack or anything, it really disrupts so many things. If you're unlucky enough or unfortunate enough that such disruptions end up on the news and on the media, this brings such a bad image and you may lose this business. Aside from that, you might lose financial losses also because of sometimes the fines that you'd incur, because regulators look at these things. Some of our contracts require that some of the information is kept secret or is kept safely. So one, you can have so many fines in regard to it. and also in the aspect of losing businesses, and also in the aspects of if you may have to, again, revamp your systems, while you could have just done something to safeguard them before that. So these may be extra costs that you do not need to incur, but in the event that you're not data protection compliant, it could be some of the outcomes that you should have. Again, let me just stress the importance of this, knowing how our day-to-day lives is basically run with personal data itself. So when you talk about data audits and data impact assessments, where are they in the law? What happened to them? This is actually quite interesting because, as we've mentioned, data impact assessments are required under law where there's a high-risk activity that's going to be done in the organization, which is very straightforward. Some of these activities, they're very obvious, and yes, you definitely need an impact assessment. If you can eventually pick another one for what's called the Huduma number registrations. Yes, that was a government initiative and it was countrywide, but assuming you're collecting such form of information for whatever reason for the organization, that means you're collecting a high volume of personal data and you're at very high risk. So an impact assessment is mandatory before you undertake such a process. When you look at on the inverse in terms of data audits are not particularly required under law. There's no law that would say you need an audit every 6 months, every year or so, but it's actually the consequences of not having one that makes it so mandatory. As we've just mentioned, our day-to-day lives from our businesses, our social lives and everything is run in a technology world, meaning everything, you have to be transmitting data from one person to another, even for basic things such as security purposes, just to make sure your safety, all buildings, just to make sure that you're safe, all buildings have security cameras, security personnel, they take your details. That's how much personal data is just transferred or just transmitted around our day-to-day lives in such a major way. So the consequences of not being in compliance, they actually the ones that make it mandatory to have a data audit. So in addition to running our business with a lot of technology, even give an example, we're doing this webinar in itself through technology. This is another way that some personal information has already been transmitted. Just an example of how much personal data and how much data travels or passes from one person to another, or rather, it's just involved in our day-to-day lives. So when it's highly advisable that every organization ensures that they undertake a data audit to be able to make sure that they're in compliance with the law, especially with the new Data Protection Act coming into force with the regulations that have different requirements. Some of them are registration requirements, some of them are just requirements of how some of the information should be handled. All of that should be taken into perspective in terms of making sure compliant with the law and undertaking an audit. So essentially what an audit is and a data protection impact assessment is basically ensuring that you're compliant with our Data Protection Act. Well, that could be very bulky if I would start to point out a law that you're required to at least be in compliance with. So the whole reason for at least this section, I can just brush through them so that, even as we're talking about this, how you do an audit and saying make sure you're compliant, means you're being compliant with these 8 principles at the minimum before we can go to other things. So the first one is the lawfulness and transparency principle. What does this mean? This is basically just meaning that make sure that any processing activity is done in a fair and lawful manner. You're only processing what is needed, what's necessary. There's no way that, or rather, you're not deceiving the data subjects while you're processing the information in what way. And lawful means just in compliance with all these principles and any other principles under law. Meaning just make sure you're not breaching any laws in terms of processing activities. For instance, if it says you do not need to, you're not allowed to do X and Y with personal data, then you should refrain from doing it. Second principle is the purpose limitation. Purpose limitation just refers to the fact that all data should be processed for a specific purpose. And being processed meaning from the point of collection. it's processed for that specific purpose that you have designated it for. So for instance, if you're taking identity documents for purpose of anti-money laundering and just KYC requirements, then it should be very clear to the data subject that this is why you need the information, this is what you're going to do with it, and how you're going to store it, if anything. And you should not be able to use the information for anything other than that. Where there's another need, you need to seek again consent from them to use the information in that way. Even if it's already in your possession, you still need the additional consent for it. Another one is the data minimization, which just means you should only collect data that you need. For instance, again, if this is anti-money laundering purposes, you don't need family information. You just need the proper account details or just identification documents. The principle basically means limit the information you're collecting to what you have, and that's it, nothing else. Or if you require any more information for any other particular purpose, then you may obtain it for that very particular reason. The other one is on accuracy, which goes without saying. Ensure that all the information that you have is accurate and up to date. This sometimes might mean for an organization that you have systems in place to allow employees to update the information that you have, or such other kind of systems. But yes, all information should be kept accurate and complete at any time. The other one is the storage limitation. Storage limitation is basically a principle on retention of data. While there's no specific kind of, or other specific time frame where you're allowed to keep information, it says you should only keep information or other personal data for a reasonable amount of time. Reasonable being enough time for you to complete the purpose or accomplish the purpose that you collected the data for. And if any other time period you need, for instance, if you need it for purposes of feedback or assessment, yes. But once you've finished or accomplished the purpose that you collected for, you need to either dispose of that information by destroying it, shredding it, deleting it, or if it's physical copies and if it needs to, return it to the data subject. You're not allowed to keep information that you have nothing else to do. So you don't need to store information for 20 years about someone else. The right to privacy, this goes without saying. This just means taking into account people's privacy and the right, for instance, right to family life. Not that information is almost not relevant to a lot of our businesses until it is. But if it's not for the sake, then you don't need it at all. Other one is the accountability principle. What is this? This just basically requires us to have integrity in our confidentiality information. Keep the information safe, have the proper measures in place, give confidence to what you're doing, that the information is not leaked or being shared with other persons. The last one is the non-transferability principle, meaning you're not allowed to transfer personal data outside the country. That's the general rule of thumb. Where that is required, there's very few exceptions to it. But as a general rule, you cannot allow to transfer it. So I go back to those 8 principles that in terms of looking at compliance, you're making sure that the organization is compliant with them. There's different, more detail to each of them, but that one we'll cover it separately later. Okay. So how do you undertake an audit? Basically, we have 3 main things that when you look at undertaking any audit or even an impact assessment. One, the security of personal data. Just make sure whatever is collected and processed is secure with you. That means how you're storing it, how you're transmitting it from one person to another. All of it, just make sure it's secure. The other one is record management. Again, this is how records containing personal data are processed. Just make sure all of it is in a safe way. And there's a proper record showing how all of it happened, how it was collected, what happened to it, where it was taken, all of it. And the last aspect we look at usually is requesting for personal data. Any request by the data subjects is one of their rights and obligations, meaning they can request it at any time. And anytime they need to see information, they need to be proper system, proper channels, whatever they require from it. If they want restrictions put or not, it should be freely and readily available. Again, it's just highlighting the importance of creation of the legally required data protection documentation. This, if I refer to an organization, this would mean, one, make sure there's a policy in place. Make sure this policy is very clear and is shared to all. And it's very also accessible to all. There's no point of having a policy when no one can access it. Either put it in somewhere where it's accessible that if any member of the organization feels like I want to counter check this or that, they can easily access it. Aside from that, depending on the nature of business, you need to make sure either your contracts or other documents that you use are still in compliance. If you need any consent, how you're obtaining the consent, make sure there's a consent form, or make sure in your contracts or anything or a website, there's a place for actually giving consent. So that can just be able to meet all the requirements of the law in terms of processing that was consented to, the purpose and everything. And it's also good for transparency. Now we can go to what it means to actually undertake a data audit. So to start with, there's two ways of looking at it. You can do it in almost like two sections. One, you can't ignore the actual interaction with the person of the organization, at least get a feel of how operations are. These operations will help you understand the business and will then give you more insight to what you need to be keen on in terms of how you protect the data. And that's one aspect of it that I'll even walk you through. So you start examining all departments and see how they handle possible data. Easy ones such as HR and accounts, they handle employee data, which is fair enough. And it's already very clear how it's collected, what do they do with it, where is it stored, what happens when an employee leaves, how is that information treated, all of that. In terms of finance and purchasing, other departments, depending on your nature of business, again, if you're doing supplies or you're talking about distributors, if you're working with other third parties to be able to provide services, these are things that you need to have just at the top of your mind when doing such audits. Just make sure you go over the industry-specific processes and make sure you even also go over secondary processes that you make sure you cover at least the mainstream part of the business. Remember, an audit is the A to Z of an organization's business to be able to see if there are any loopholes or anything that needs to be improved. Then for every core and secondary processes, also the further use of them and storage, as per se. So are you storing them on the cloud because you have a cloud storage where you're backing up all your data? Now, this is something that can be very loosely construed, but a lot of people or companies or even products are backing up their data online now. And ways online, that would mean their servers somewhere. Are they in Kenya? Are they outside Kenya? Are they compliant with security measures? Those are some things you need to think of, even in your organization, where you're storing your data. If it's from cloud storage, that's the servers are abroad, it's also good to make sure that those servers are very secure. And as you transmit data, it's not intercepted or stolen or breached in any way. A good auditor will go into as much detail as possible as you're discussing with the personnel in the company. Another helpful way of doing this is having a very well-structured and elaborate questionnaire. This will help because businesses almost run the same way. May not have the same data, but they're all for profit. So there'll be some questions that will help you always come up with that. Maybe if you don't have it structured somewhere, it might slip your mind. So having a well-structured questionnaire helps in this, helps in how you approach it, what you need. And questionnaire can change in different service industries. It just helps organize things and make sure you don't need anything beforehand. Then what do you do after you review or analyze the company's operations? Then you make specific recommendations. As mentioned, almost all audits and impact assessments and shortcomings. If you do this on a regular basis, with very minimal shortcomings. If you do this once in a blue moon, you might find very major loopholes that you need to deal with before you even proceed, because they might end up costing much more than you think. Again, just think about all the big companies and big tech companies that you hear that are constantly being fined the millions and billions for data breaches. That's how much it can cost you. It can be something small overlooked, but it's also something to think about. So usually the person that's taking the audit will work with the organization to develop recommendations. This would mean if there's a data protection officer, then they will be required to assist and give recommendations, also assist in coming up or creating recommendations that would work specifically for that organization. As you know, everyone works differently, so it's important to do something that works for you. Otherwise, it will be futile. An example of this would include, maybe in the case of application documents, you have a height pool of people where people send applications that they can, in terms of getting employment opportunities with yourself. And where does that information go? You obviously cannot hire everyone. What happens when you already picked your candidate and there's another whole pool of candidates? What do you do with that information? Have the people who give it or who submitted the application, they consent to you holding that information for future openings? Or if you have no further use of it, then you should either destroy the information or just return it to physical. Just some few things to think about. Then there's the implementation stage. Implementation is basically now finding out all the solutions to come up with and now implementing them. Again, this is now, ideally, it would heavily involve the members of the organization, the data protection officer, if you have one, whoever is in charge of how data protection is in the organization, because they'll help you find tailor-made solutions that will actually work for this, for the particular entity. Some of them, because of the industry, they might need a higher level of, tools and platforms that would help them assist as opposed to others. This goes without saying that, again, with our modern world of technology, different services operate differently. So in practice, this task can be very challenging, especially with international corporations, because if we think about it, if you have other related companies or entities working in other countries, remember those countries also have their own data protection laws and their own compliance measures. So you have to do something that harmonizes both of them. So it might not necessarily be a one-day job, and it would be an implementation stage that may take months to come with an additional monitoring to see if it actually makes sense. Is this working? Is this not? If it's not working, how can we change it to something that works? If it is, then it's just make sure they're implemented permanently. And as much as that's just a very brief overview of how you'll do it. If you're having a face-to-face review with the whole company, speaking with people, there's also a deeper aspect to it, because most of the, as we said, since technology is heavily involved in our world today, there's so much that you need to do, even in terms of auditing our own systems. So from here, I will leave my colleague take over from now.
Yes, hi, good afternoon all. We are still proceeding with the presentation on data audit and compliance. And remember, in data, there are many securities which you have to look at when it comes to security of the systems. So I'm just going also to proceed with how the system, the data itself can be protected, some of the security mechanisms, which can also be looked at and also can be implemented. So I'm just going to also share with you some of the security. For example, when we are looking at about now the analysis on the current situation, you will realize that there are some of the areas which we have to look at, and at the same time, there are also some of the factors which we have also to monitor. First, when you are looking about the data, remember data is just an information, and also any figure or any numbers which are stored in computers or any communication devices. So why do I say this? So when we are doing the data audit compliance, we have also to start looking for the information management security policies, because remember, this is data, and data is very sensitive. So if your data is not secured, be it institutions' data or personal data, we'll not be able to know who accessed the data at what time and at what location. So we have to look at information security management policy. And in this step, you will realize that there are many things which we have to check. And for example, this one we learn that there are some policies for information management, which can be defined, approved by management, and also published. So in this, you'll also be able to understand some of the areas which you have to look at. For example, in an institution, we have the policies, how you can access the data. And at the same time, you have also some of the policies which you have to look and also checked. In this scenario, you learn that there are, in information security policy, you must understand to what level can you access this data. And that is why I'm talking about the information security management. Organizations will also come up with the approach from the board, level, the media, and also to the staffs on how they can make sure that they are protecting their data. Another one which I'm supposed to talk to, and I'm also giving it as a very, very important factor is internal organizations of the information security. Why do I say this? In information security, remember, data has to have some of the security measures. For example, the segregation of duties. In segregation of duties, you'll realize that, for example, the data which is being used by the finance department and the data which is being used by the HR departments, these are data, but the people are supposed to use them. The people are supposed to access them. The users has to be different. So you have to segment the users based on the level of access they can be able to access the data, so that in any case there is an access of data from any angle, you will be able to understand who accessed the data and who has the access of that data. If the person who has accessed the data, maybe I can call it an intruder, is not among the list of the users who are supposed to access the data, then you will be able to know that there's a breach of access. At the same time, you'll also be able to understand the asset management of the responsibility. Why do I say that you have to look at the asset management? In an institution, we are using the system. The system itself is not about the network environment, the network architecture, the design. Is about the people, process, and technology. These three factors play a very critical role when it comes to data security and also data audit. So they're the users who access the data. Then there's the process. The process where now the policy and also the asset management responsibility is coming in. Then now the technology. Once any staff or any user wants to access the data from any remote area, he or she will be able to know some of the things which they have to do. And also in any environment, you will also be able to understand the situation the situation of some of the areas which you have to take precautions against. And also, that one I'm also taking you to now the information classification, where in information classification, you will be able to classify the data in terms of the sensitivity, in terms of the criticality, and also in terms of the value. If I want to access the data from the data, the information from the data, for example, it is the financial or transaction information or transaction data in that transaction table in the database. Am I the right person to access that data? If I'm not the right person, then I should be questioned, or I can be asked the reason as to why I want to access that data. So in the information of classification, you will be able to classify data based on the use. You can label it, for example, you can label the data. You'll also be able to understand how it is going to be stored once you already label it. And also that one will help you to make the data flow when it comes to transfer or any use. At the same time, you'll also be able to understand the media handling. For example, you'll realize that most of data nowadays are being used in the cloud, are also being used in the with the different communication devices. You can store data from any communication. So in this handling, you will be able to implement the management of the removal of media in accordance with the classification. Why do I say this? Once you already understand the scenario and also the institution policies and the working environment, you will be able to know when you want to use the data. For example, the medium handling, how do you use, what are some of the areas you have to look at it? If you want to use that device, to what network or to what network environment do you want to apply it in? Sometimes that is why I'm always encouraging people not to use any free Wi-Fi networks in any public environment, because you will not be able to understand, or you will not be able to know the full the person who has the super control of that environment, on that network. So at the same time, when you are dealing with data, you have also to understand the access controls. Access control is the policy where you will be able to establish some of the areas or some of the key roles which will help you to know how you are accessing your data. And this is why this webinar is very important because it also creates awareness training and also readiness, and also it will enable you to understand some of the areas or some of the factors which you have to put in place, the mechanisms for you to protect the data when you want to access. Not everybody should access your data. Not everybody should control your data, be it the boss, be it anybody else, or maybe some of the software providers or software vendors. There must be an agreement. So when you look at now the access controls, you will be able to know some of the mechanisms which have taken place. So I'll also be able to bring this. Why do I say this? Because once you have to access the data, there must be a network. So network services, we learn that there are users who are supposed to be provided with access. So in this factor, the people who has to access the data will be provided with the password, or will be provided with some of the mechanisms so that they can be able to understand and also follow the rules which are in place. So that is why, because different environments have different networks, but a network has to be controlled by a user who is also a person. So this person, also the people who are accessing this network, they should be the people who are authorized to use the network. Anybody who can access the network without any authorization will be an intruder, and you don't know the intention of this person. Sometimes he can access the environment because he or she wants to cause the damage, which is not allowed when it comes to data protection regulations. So in any environment, when you are doing the data audit, there are some of the things which you have also to check, because you have to understand your network environment. You have also to understand some of how your network, how your system stands, the posture. Because if you don't stand in a good posture, it is easier for you to fall. So there are some of the areas which you have also to look at, and it will enable you to protect your data. It will protect environment, and also it will make you to make your users, which are the people who have good working environment. Again, I'll also talk about now the access level, user access management level. In the user access management level, it comes now the privilege. A good example is a networking environment. You know that in a networking environment, there are the IT guys who are able to give support. There are the finance department, there are the human resource department, and also operation and marketing. It depends with the size of your organization. But the most important thing, the privileges in any environment, if there is no privilege access rules, then your data should, you should just understand that your data should be at risk. So this is the reason why we have to bring all these factors. We have to understand the privilege. The privilege access has the levels. So, for example, the database admin or the system administrator, in most environment, they are the full, that the people have the full access. They can assign any policy, they can remove any policy, and also they can add any policy. When it comes now to the users on the forefront, you'll know that they are the only platform that are being given is what is relevant with their functionality, and also is relevant with their job description. So that is why we have also to understand this factor, which is very, very important when you are protecting your data. And also, I'm going to also talk about the system application controls, which will let that any authorized access to the system and applications should also have some of the credentials, which are the passwords. For example, password is just a factor which is being used to protect your work and also your environment. And that is why it's not allowed, and we are encouraging that even if users are working, they should not be able to type their password, or maybe to write their password in the sticky note so that anybody who is passing around can just check. There are some of the things which they are very small, they are very little, but most of this network, these intruders, for example, the black hackers and also the cybercrime guys, they understand how human behaves. They understand the psychology when it comes to human factor. Just some of the things they will use do the social engineering, the phishing, to make sure that they get your information, they can access your information. Remember, if they use your information to access your systems, you will be accounted for that. And also you'll be reliable to answer any questions which can come from any seniority, even from the department. And again, when it comes to the analysis, we have also to understand the protection from the malware. In any environment, do the patching, the system patching, we have to do the system update, we have to use the antiviruses to protect your systems. So in all these factors, they are being used to protect your data. And that is why it is very, very important that any intruder can use any malware, bit, keylogger, bit, ransomware. They can just send it through your environment. They can even use the man in the middle to sniff your information so that they can use the information to damage the institution. They can use it to damage the working environment. And this one, if any intruder access and also do it successfully, remember, the most thing which the company or any institution will lose is the finance. And any businesses, the most important thing is to, and that is why also we're using the IT as a facilitator and also as an enabler to make all these working environments safe. So we are just trying to encourage the audience, we are the users, even in the working environment, that it is easier for you to take all these small factors, which are very, very important. They can help you to protect your data. They will help you to enhance your standing posture in terms of the security. They will also help you to understand some of these angles or approaches or methodology which can be used to attack your environment. Then also you have also to understand that there's also information backup. Why do I talk about the information backup? In any environment, backup is very, very important. For example, is when the country left. Is when the country had an election. There was some belief that maybe there may be some movements around here and there. If you don't have the backup and you cannot access your working environment, most of the things which are always being used, you can be used, your backup information can be used when you have the business continuity planning in place, when you have the disaster management plan in place. So it will make the technical guys who are the IT departments to make sure that the working timeline and also the working time and also the effectiveness of the environment is still in order. They will make sure that the users are still accessing the systems, but the users might not know if they're using the backup server or they're using any server around somewhere. So these are some of the things which are very, very important. That is why in your environment, you have to back up your data, you have to back up everything. You have also to make sure that your systems are patched so that in any case there's an intruder or there's an attempt of attacking your environment, you will be able to understand some of the precautions which you have to take in place. So there are some of the things which we have also to understand. At the same time, the network control. Network control, you will be able to understand which are some of the people who are supposed to be within the network. Because, for example, if you're working in a certain environment, like the environment where I am now, and at the same time there is a stranger in the same environment, I don't know the intention of this stranger. If this stranger can access my environment without us knowing, or maybe giving an alert, we'll be able to understand that the person can as well go ahead and access my own information. And these are some of the things which you have also to understand, that within your network design, how is it protected? How is the place of the firewall? How is the place? How many firewalls are DB? How do you protect your DB? What are some of the flaws, some of the security and also the privilege access levels which this person has to check? And that is why it is also recommended that in any working environment, you have to understand the operation. You get the users who are the employees of any institution should also be able to understand these cybersecurity factors, the basics of it, so that in any case they even receive any information from their desktop or from their laptops, they will be able to send an alert to their IT department. And most of also this working environment, if you've already implemented or deployed the security mechanisms such as, for example, the Portnox environment or XDX, you will be able to understand. They will help you to protect your information. They will help you to fight any attack which might come from a third party. And remember, this is data. Data is very, very sensitive. Once I get full control of your data, I'll be able to manipulate whatever I want to do with it. I can even use it to help you to damage your reputation, bring your company down. So that is why it is very, very careful that each environment, any institutions, you need to do the data audit, you have to comply. And also there are some of the standards which you have to comply with. For example, the people are in the fintech, there is the standard of the, it is called the PCIe DSSS, which is used for in the fintech industry, and any environment which does the transaction. It is very, very important for the environment, also for the institutions or organizations to understand this factor. We have the ISO 2700, ISO 2013. So all these factors, it will be able to make you understand that you are complying with the security mechanisms internationally, globally. You have also to understand also the information transfer policy procedure. In information transfer policy procedure, why is it very important? The transfer policy procedure, it will make you to understand how the data is being transferred from one place to the other. And that is why we have also to understand the state of the data. We have the data at rest, we have the data in, we have the data in move, and also we have the data in use. So the data at rest, remember the data at rest, for example, it is the data which you have with your external devices, for example, the backup data, those are the data which you can classify under the data at rest. The data in move, for example, is the data which you use. I'm sending you an email, the attachment. This is the data in use. And also when it comes also to the data in use, these are now the files. For example, the Office files, the PDF, the PowerPoint. It is also very easy for you to understand and also to classify this data based on the need and also based on the sensitivity and also the criticality. So in any working environment, if your data is dirty, remember you are in a mess. Some of the first steps which you have to understand and also which you have to implement is to clean your data. Make sure that the data you are using is a clean data. Make sure that the data you are transferring to the third party is the exact data which the third party had already requested. Because remember, even in any case, for example, in the data breach, you will be asked, even if, for example, there's a case and even the DCI officers want to access to have your data. If they go to the Safaricom, they have just to have the formal letter which is signed by their bosses, and they have to be special officers which are related with that case. They will just write to the telecom communication office to acquire for the specific data, not all of your data. But this one, they will have to make you have the consent, because nowadays with the Data Protection Act is also very, very important that it will also be able to, you will also be able to be given an alert. You will be able to be informed on how someone or the third party wants to use your data. If it is not under your consent, you can take that to the next level. You can also solve it in the court of in the corridors of justice. And that is why it is very, very important. When it comes to the agreement of transfer of data, the third party, for example, you want to transfer your data from Kenya to maybe to Canada, there are some of the international policies and laws which govern that and also which protect that, which my colleague had already talked about. So when it comes to the data protection impact assessment, this is just I want just to highlight the blueprint report, where the first place you will be able to have the description of the proposed processing operations and also the personal data to be involved. Why is this one important? It is important because that the report has to have the starting point of the collection, and also it also has to have the the body of the methodology and also the approach which was used or which is used to collect your data. And that is why it is used. It is also be able to make you understand which are some of these processes you have to take. You have to go through for you to understand or collect your data. I'm just highlighting. And also, you have also to understand some of the legitimacy and also the controls you have to put place when you are the controller is using your personal data, which is defined by the Global Data Protection Regulation and also the Data Protection Act. This one will enable you to understand how your data is going to be used, how your data is going to be protected. Also, the report also has to have an assessment of the necessity and the probability of the processing of the data. The probability and also the necessity is your data which is being needed by a third party or any other institution is relevant with whatever they want to do with it. And do you have the consent about that? Also, we'll also have to look at the results, some of the results of the assessment of the risk and also the rights and also the freedom for data subject. Remember, in data, there's some of the risk and risk. You have also to identify the risks based on the high, medium, and also the low risk. In any environment, people should be encouraged to understand the high risk and also do anything which is possible to reduce that risk. Because if the environment has high risk on a higher percentage, it is a dangerous to the institution, it is a dangerous to you as an individual. It will also enable you to have some of the loopholes which any other third party can use to access your data. Also, the report also has to have the priority on the risk treatment and also the risk owners. Why do I say this? Once you already identified the risk, you'll also be able to understand that the law, to understand how you are subjected to protect the high risk, the medium, and also the low risk. Also the timeline or time scale for the action also is very, very important when you are doing the data protection impact assessment. And I'm just also inviting my colleague also to proceed. And we believe that in data protection and audit compliance, it is very, very important based on now the country is going the digital environment, the digital world. Cyberspace is very important. We encourage people to do the cyber trainings, cyber crime resilience trainings, digital forensic investigation trainings, and it is also a very privilege for me to lead it at that juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Maurice. I like that you have highlighted the differences between data audits and DPIA, and that data audits are not necessarily compulsory to be done under the Data Protection Act. However, there are advantages towards doing the data audits, which include ensuring that you comply with the Data Protection Act, and it also helps you as a data processor or controller when it comes to the data commission, ensuring that you're complying, and even in the periodic audits, that you're actually complying with the Data Protection Act. Now, since I can see we are past the Nairobi rush hour, we'll brush through the Q&A really fast. The first question, I can see Josh Okod is asking, in the case of entering a building and I'm required to leave my ID, should I comply, knowing well we have had situations where you end up finding out your ID was used for illegal activity? Should I just leave my ID but not the physical one? I think I'll let Maurice answer that.
Right. In terms of the security details that were required, for instance, leaving your ID or ask for other details, maybe your name and whatnot, usually that they're done for security purposes, and there's two ways or rather two reasons why they're doing it. One, the organization that hires them or that's requiring them, mandating them to do that, it should have its own privacy policy on why they're collecting this information and what it's going to be used for. Ideally, we already know it's used for security purposes, and if anything else or any other use they want to use such information for, they need to seek our consent that means they need to ask you, you need to confirm whether you're okay or or fine by giving the consent. On top of that, there's also one requirement under the Data Protection Act where one of the grounds that someone can process without the consent of the data subject is whether they're doing it to the best interest of the data subject themselves. So it can be argued that your safety and your security is in your best interest and that they're looking out for your interest, and that's why they can process such information. Now, in terms of, I think now the issue comes in terms of them storing that information. What do they do with it after they've already collected it? You came to the building, you finished what you're doing, and you left. How long are they keeping that information? And is it justifiable? Do they have a reason why they'll continue keeping that information? I think those are now the questions that we need to ask, or else it might seem that they shouldn't keep it that long, especially in terms of leaving a copy of your ID. They should justify it, otherwise they shouldn't be able to hold it that much.
There's a question from Elizabeth Mukuna. Can you briefly explain the differences between a data processor and a data controller? And as you explain the differences, can you highlight whether they work separately or synonymously?
Right. In terms of the difference in a data processor and data controller, the difference is more or less in what they do with the information. Now, what the Data Protection Act provides for that, a data controller is someone who more or less has the authority over that data. They're going to decide what you do with it. Because they've collected it, are they going to store it? Are they going to transmit it? Are they going to transfer it? How are they going to process? Why are they going to do it? Because they're the ones who are the ones making such decisions. They are the data controller. Now, data processor is the person who actually ends up doing the processing of the information. And you may recall the term processing of the information or of the personal data is actually quite broad and includes almost anything from analyzing, from storing, transmitting. Basically, the person now who's dealing or handling that personal data is processing it. So usually it can actually be both persons. So an organization can be both a controller and a processor because they're the ones holding the information, they're the ones in charge and being able to decide what or determine what to do with it or how to go about processing it. And at the same time, they're the same ones doing it. So yes, it's possible to be both a controller and a processor. I think they're just separate. The roles are separate because in our day-to-day world, there's actually, we now have persons who process data on your behalf. We have persons who can either be storing in, if they're storing on servers somewhere or in whichever facility, or if they're person to collect data and extract some information from it. All that is now done separately by a person called the data processor. However, day-to-day processing can still be done by the controller themselves.
We have a question in the chat box by Karuga. Jimmy Mwaluma. He's asking, does the DP also cover audio stroke recorded voices, etc.?
So in terms of audio recording, audio and maybe visual recording, yes, they're covered under the Data Protection Act. The Data Protection Act itself covers any form of personal data. Personal data is actually any information that can help you identify someone. It could be your voice, it could be maybe anything about you that can link you to it, like that can help someone identify that this is the person I'm talking about, this is the person I'm referring to. Then it's considered as personal data, and then it's covered and protected under law. And this is, if you may recall, or maybe not. This is something that's also being tested in Europe, where there's been some instances where, as you may see on some movies, the police go and tap your phone or anywhere just to get some information about you. And that has actually been held that they're breaching you, or rather, they're in breach of your personal data rights because they're infringing on them. They're not supposed to have it unless it's consensual to it. So yes, audio, recorded voices, visuals, and any other information that can identify a person is deemed to be data, personal data, and is protected under law.
There is a question by Kennedy Kairu, who's asking, what about data breaches from organizations such as our self-service providers, where our phone numbers end up in the hands of advertising companies, scammers, and even recently, politicians?
Right. So in terms of such data breaches by organizations, especially the telecoms and whatnot, one, yes, it's a very massive breach of personal data. They're not allowed to use your personal data in any other way other than they have instructed or other provided themselves to be. Remember that goes hand in hand in terms of the purpose limitation principle, where they only use the data for what specifically they said they'll use it for. That would mean they can't start using it for advertising or branding or in any way that they want. They can't even use it for their own analysis unless that very clearly indicated that they'd use it for their marketing purposes or not. If not, then they breach of our data protection rights and action could be taken against them. Now, one of the reasons that they have been doing it, and we were hoping that it stopped doing it, was because previously, until very recently, we didn't have a data protection act that was in place. That would mean they could just do anything because there's nothing protecting our personal data. So end of 2019, the Data Protection Act comes, and the regulations that are supposed to help it be more enforceable come into play late last year, early this year. Enforcement is just starting, and we're about to see so many changes about such things. But at least from the standpoint of why they used to do it, maybe because there was no law, but now that there are laws, they shouldn't be able to do it, and action can be raised against them.
Okay, I think most of the questions are actually law related. I think you've decided to put Maurice on the spot. However, there's someone asking, is there any form of certification given to organizations when they are compliant with data laws, or is there a way a consumer can easily identify organizations that have gone through these audits and have implemented the findings?
Right. So yes, there are some form of certifications given to organizations in terms of whether they are data protection compliant. Particularly, there are some even individual certificates that can be given that you have undergone this particular training and you're now competent to provide this and this services in regard to data protection. And these range from small things that you can find locally. I know some of the local universities such as Strathmore provide such courses, but also international ones. We are able to provide more on data protection and have more material on it. In terms of organizations, yes, I would even presume or rather recommend while you're transacting with them, you have it or have them require that they have in place data protection policies that require them to be up to standard. Now, whether or not they are certified, I'm sure there are some certifications that they can take to ensure that their cybersecurity systems are very well measured. And some of them, if you ask for this certification, they'll be able to present them to you. So that's just a question of whether you ask about them or not. But we also recommend that if you are transacting or doing business in a way that it will affect your personal data, you can require that it's a contractual mandate that they're up to standard in data protection compliance.
Thank you, Maurice. I can see Lydia Awar has her hand raised. IT guys can allow her to speak. Lydia, your mic is unmuted now. Lydia, can you hear us? Well, before Lydia addresses us, I think we have one final question in our chat box. And this pertains the use of medical information, rather where employers are asking for medical information before engaging you as an employee. Maybe Maurice, you can respond to that.
Right. So in terms of the medical information that maybe employers ask for, the law requires that one, they collect information that is only useful to them for the particular purpose. So if it's particularly your employment or your job description does not require or has anything in relation to the medical circumstances, then yes, they should not be able to be collecting it just for the sake. But if for any reason that for the performance of your duty, they require to know such information, then yes, they're allowed to collect this information. However, I'll just repeat that it needs to be that they would need that information for the performance of your role your role or in whatever you do on a day-to-day is directly linked to why they need this information. Otherwise, under the principle of purpose limitation, they're not allowed to just collect information for the sake, can have a fishing expedition for that one.
Once again, thank you, Maurice and Mike, for being our speakers today. And thank you to all our attendees for joining us today. CM Academy will be offering another webinar on a different topic in the coming months, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. CM Advocates and Risk House International at I&M Bank House on 2nd Ngong Avenue. In case of any inquiries, in case you'd like to visit us and learn more about our services, you're welcome. You can also find us on our social media pages, Risk House International Limited and CM Advocates, that is on LinkedIn, Facebook, and on Twitter. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you.
John.